now we'll go back. Okay, there we go. So the reality here is that Christianity is declining pretty rapidly. Even if people didn't switch denominations, we'd have 54% in America as Christian. If they were, if the nuns, as you will, were coming in and Christians were stepping out, so that would be like a steady switching, be 46%. And then if you have, they have 39% with limits, meaning that the cap of Christians would be 50%, and then nuns coming in and out, and then 35% without. So it's really, it's just not a good story. It's not a good projection, bottom line. Oh, Candace,
Lauren,
yes.
What year is that line?
That's 2070.
Thank you.
Good question. And I will give you the link to this article as well. After this training, I will send you all of the resources here so you can read them through in your own time. So the question is, why the Exodus? Why are so many people leaving the Christian church in America? Well, one big reason is a lot of people feel like Christians just don't walk the walk. They are judgmental. They care more about money. They don't act like Jesus whatsoever. And so why give up their Sunday morning to be a part of a community like that? There was a rise of Christian conservative politics in the 90s as well, when we started to see a decline. And some people are just leaving religion altogether, and could be for a variety of reasons. It might be even colonizing Christianity. We don't really know all the way, and there's many articles about why people are leaving the church, and I'm sure you could read for hours upon hours of the ideas as to why. But for our purposes today, it's not always about, I mean, the why is important, but I think it's also a question of, okay, so what do we do now, right? How do we respond to the people who are leaving the church? How do we meet the needs of that community that don't feel a place within the church? So that's really where we turn our attention. And so that's where observation comes in. We observe all the time. We observe our culture in books and movies and television, and just knowing people around us. We use our tools like Mission Insight or census data kind of stuff to build a picture, a holistic picture, just through observation. So we're going to do an exercise here where you, I won't time you yet. Get a piece of paper or type on your computer, whatever, but take a minute to think about who your neighbor is, the neighbors around you. Do you know their names? Do you know their ages? Do they rent? Do they own a house? Where do they work? What do they do for fun? What are their struggles? Just name everything you can about your neighbors in 1 minute. Okay, are you ready? Set, go. 6 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Get a good idea of who your neighbor is? Got it in your head? Good. And now we're going to think about who our neighbor is going to be in 10 years. You have a minute now to think, how will your neighbors, your neighborhood transform in the next 10 years? Will they be the same? How will they be different? You have 1 minute. 4, 3, 2, 1. So why don't we just take a minute here to offer up just a few thoughts you had about what your current neighborhood is and how you think it's going to change. Would anybody like to share their thoughts?
Lauren, were we discussing like our church neighborhood or where we live? I guess is what, because mine is quite divergent.
It was an open question because
Okay.
I didn't want to determine that for you. So just wherever your mind went, would you mind sharing with us, Jim?
Well, we live in a neighborhood with rather large houses, so we have a number of families with small children, and I know most of the neighbors because I go out walking every day. So probably more, I probably know more of them than most people do.
Great. And how do you think that neighborhood's going to change in 10 years?
I don't see it changing a whole lot. As people age out of the neighborhood, they are moving well, we've had 2 move to assisted living. And they're being replaced by families with young children. So.
Very good. Yeah. Anyone else like to share?
Lauren, I agree with his comments almost completely describing my neighborhood. What I do think is that we will continue to replace aging people who sell their homes with younger families with younger children, because we have a very active elementary school right in the neighborhood that I think will continue to draw. We have a nice mix of blue collar and white collar workers, a nice sense of community. I don't see that changing. The parts of the neighborhood are 20 years old, and it hasn't changed very much in demographics over that time. So I think that there will continue to be younger families. Now, I don't see them as really involved in church. My close neighbors are not. So I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And Queen Creek has a lot of families moving to the area. So that makes a lot of sense. Good. So yes, Marianne, sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
I'm in an interesting situation because I've lived within a half a mile of where I am since 1951. And where my house is currently sitting used to be grape vineyards, and with cotton fields all around it in the Flowing Wells area of Tucson. And I've seen this particular development be built and grown, and the original occupants of these houses were a school superintendent, a school principal, a city attorney, the owner of a plumbing company, and so on. And at this point, the people who live here are either people who have been here, as I have, for a very long time, 30 to 40 years, or newer, younger families who are primarily Hispanic, Roman Catholic. They have school-age children and work in construction or retail, or less a management level tier than what it was when I first moved in here in '86.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone through a lot of transitions.
Yes. And that's really important to recognize, right? Because how does the church transform as the community does, right? And that's where Mission Insight is really helpful, to help us get a specific idea of the community around us and if our church represents that community. I am going to switch to showing you Mission Insight. I'm going to switch my screen to showing you the login and the process and how you would pull these. Now, remember, I will send you this presentation. I will send you all the steps. How many of you have a login already for Mission Insight? Just 2 people. Okay, and that's fine. You don't need it. It's okay. If you want it, you can email Lorena at the district office or Rachel Gilmore even. You can even email me. That would be fine. I will give you, you can just respond back and I will make sure it gets sent to the right people. And so once you can get in, or you can also just request a report for your area and what you want the radius to be. That would be fine as well. If you don't want to dig in yourself, that's okay. So let me switch to my screen and I will show you all of the steps to get your report. Can you see this, my login screen here? Good. Okay, so when you get to the login, you'll have, and if you request a login, you'll put in your email and your password. That's easy. We all know how to do that. Just, and then I'm going to do it I'm going to go through the Desert Southwest here because I'm actually going to pull up Trinity Heights. So you won't hit that window probably. You'll just have your church, I would assume. But once you get into this screen, this nice little pop-up is you're going to click generate that. I'm sorry, I went over that a little too fast. Generate demographic reports. That's the button we want to push here. And then we're going to do predefined boundaries based around a zip code or, nope, I apologize. I said the wrong thing. We're going to go to the radius or a polygon. And put in your address. I'm going to do Trinity Heights because it's new territory for me and you get to do this with me. I'm going to do a radius. You could do a polygon, which means that you can just do kind of any shape you want. So if you know the streets of your area and you want to look at a certain section of streets, that a polygon would be a really good way to do that. Yes, Candace.
So Lauren, because I'm very familiar with that district, you're going to want to do a polygon for Trinity Heights because it backs up to the mountain.
See, thank you.
So radius isn't going to do you any good to the, I don't know what direction.
To the behind you.
Yeah, because it butts up to the mountain, so there's nothing behind it.
Got it. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't done that before, so I'm gonna just do the radius for today's training, and then I will have to teach myself how to do a polygon afterwards. But thank you for that insight. That is very helpful. And so, sorry, address. We'll do that again. This is helping me learn the address too. For today's purpose, I'm just going to do the 2.5 just so we can walk through it. And then predefined report. And for this, we're going to pick 3 options here. We're going to pick quick insight, religious insight, and ministry insight. And then that will generate a report. You check all the details you want, make sure it's in the right area you want, it's in the right radius, kind of thing, and then you finish and it runs a report for you. I already ran this report, so I'm just going to switch over to it here. And this was what had been pulled up for Trinity Heights, 2.5 miles around Trinity Heights. And now we'll go through a few different sections. Does anyone have any questions so far with how I got there? So the point of the quick insight report is to just give a quick look of the geography defined and provide an initial impression. And it's going to give you 2 different sections. There's a story view, which is kind of like a recap page, if you will. It's a nice quick glance at the area. And then it breaks down into different theme views and gives you greater detail to certain elements of the data that will be helpful to you to create a picture. So this is the highlight page I was telling you about, the story view. That's the first page of the report. And then we'll go to the theme views. This page here is the demographic descriptions of the study area. So population, households, and families. And what is really helpful, I think, in this is there's a projection. So it shows you the history of 20 years, and then it gives you a projection of the next 10 years. So according to this, they don't know how many families will be in Flagstaff in 2032. It's either 0 or they don't know, but it's not here. So interesting, right? That creates a question for me to consider. If we continue to go down, then we'll start to see the population change and household percentage change. Again, this like projection into the future can be really helpful to seeing where our community is starting to shift. It gives you a comparison of types of households with the state and your area, which can be helpful to know. And then I'm going to move down to this page, the education page. Also can be really helpful to know what's the level of education for people around you. This is really helpful for pastors too, as they're crafting their sermons, right? What kind of presentation would be beneficial to the community as they're leading the worship service, right? Thinking about that kind of element can be really helpful. And in Flagstaff here, we have more white collar than we do blue collar, at least around Trinity Heights. And that might just be the area of Flagstaff or around Trinity Heights as well, not Flagstaff overall, right? So considering your radius and what it's contributing to. Any questions so far? I know I'm going fast through these a little bit because I want us to do a little group work and I want us to have more time to do that. No questions. This graph here, I think, is particularly useful. It is a community diversity theme for the next couple pages, and it shows you the ethnic diversity that's around you. Now, why this is really helpful is sometimes these graphs are, let's say I saw a graph that was 50% Hispanic and Latino, and but the church that ran the report is all white. So that's telling right there. They're attracting only white people, but not the 50% Hispanic and Latino around them. And also, it can give way to thinking, how accurate is this information, right? This is census data, so we have to remember it doesn't pull everything in because not everybody contributes to the census. In particular, Indigenous communities are well known for not mentioning their numbers to census reports for understandable reasons. So we have to consider that as well. So it just kind of, it's a way to say, okay, well, this is our community according to the census, but I'm seeing this over here. Or, for example, some places, say Mesa, will say, well, wait, there's a lot of Mormon families around me too, but we'll see here in some other community diversities, they're not showing up. How come the Mormons aren't showing up? Because many Mormons do not report these numbers to the census. And so they're not calculated here, right? And so it's not always accurate, but it begins to give us a good impression about what is around us. And then we can fill in the blanks with our observational skills that we talked about earlier, right? And just paying attention with what's around you and then also what the report is saying. Any questions so far? Now this here is mosaic segments. Mosaic segments is Mission Insight's fun way of naming groups of people. And so for around Trinity Heights, their biggest population here is singles and starters. And so I'm going to give you a link to a report that's like hundreds of pages, and it breaks out each and every one of these mosaics with their average age range, what they do for fun, what kind of work they do, what's their education level typically. So think of it like a named focus group, which is helpful. Now, this is helpful for me too, because I know the average age of people attending Trinity Heights, I know is not this group right here. Right? So there's something being told of we're not reaching a big part of the population. Right? So we get to ask those questions, and it begins the whys, and then it begins the how do we connect. So it just begins the conversation through these. And then finally, this financial resources theme here too. For example, if you live in a high household income area, yet the generosity of your church is really low, that's telling, right? That becomes a conversation of there's a lack of generosity, and maybe there's a spiritual issue here at hand that we're not paying attention to, right? And so again, these details just help you ask more questions and create a plan of how to tackle things around you. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw a few chats and I didn't see that. Oh, okay. Thank you. It's hard to see the chats in the, well, I'm sharing my screen, but if anyone ever needs to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or use the reactions raise hand button. Then you'll pop right up to the top and I'll be able to see you too. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to have you all break out into groups. I'm going to give you the link to the Trinity Heights report. Now, as Candace said, it's probably not 100% because half of it is a mountain. So take that as you will. But you can look through it and just start to think of things that maybe surprised you or didn't surprise you, or questions that came up through it. And you can always message me too if you have any other questions. So I'm going to put this link here in the chat. Oh, maybe you can't see that. You should be able to put that in your browser. Maybe not. I have a better idea. We'll do this. I'll just add the PDF to the chat. That'll be easier. There you go.
Yeah, it didn't work in the browser.
Okay, good, thanks. See, I know I'm a millennial, but I'm an old millennial, so I don't know all the things. That's the truth.
You are not an old woman.
Actually, the term is elder millennial or geriatric millennial.
She is, Michael.
Yep. Because I was born in the 80s. Yep.
Yep. My husband reminds me all the time I'm a millennial.
So you should be able to click that PDF and download it.
I was born in the late 60s. I'm old.
Really old.
I am old.
Everyone good? You
No.
really just need one person with it because we just really need two people with it because I'm going to break you out. So, and I'm doing it automatically. And all right, here we go. We'll have about 5 minutes to just talk about what you recognized or surprised you or didn't surprise you. Okay, good. Do you have enough to talk about? Just for our recording purposes and the people who will watch this a little later, could you tell us something that surprised you? Anybody? What came up?
You should always read the memo line or whatever you want to call it on reports, because they don't project family data out for 10 years, Lauren.
Oh.
So that's why everybody's report has nothing on that. So whether that surprises you or not, there's some information.
You go.
Because Joel and I were both like,
Always-
wait a minute.
Always learning. I've looked at how many of these, but you
Right,
know,
but-
you missed
'cause
that
Joel-
fine print.
Joel's like, mine doesn't have that either. I'm like, let me pull up mine. Oh yeah, wait a minute. There's a note right here.
Look at that.
Amazing what happens when you read the fine print.
And yes, Methodist connectionalism at its best right there. Good job, Sylvia.
I was surprised that they lumped Native Americans in with Pacific Islanders and
Mhm.
other non-Hispanic. I mean, how broad of a group is that? And is it even useful information that?
Yeah.
um,
Great
That
question.
surprised me.
That you'll be able to see by observation, Debbie. So when
Yeah.
Lauren gets up to Flagstaff, she'll recognize that number is primarily Native Americans,
Yeah,
just because they're right next to the reservation.
right.
Mm.
So that's when you say, okay, I need to look, who's here,
Exactly.
right? That when she said observation.
Yeah.
So Lauren, the thing that that I noticed that I can affirm simply because I know the area is you have high wealth people right around the church, but not far. You've got a lot of poverty.
Mhm.
So Trinity Heights, I think, has catered to the higher income, but served the lower income. I think that has been their model. They have not, I just think that's been their model. And so, but that comes out in the demographic report, right? Because you've got close split between white collar, blue collar. You won't, I don't think you'll see that in the church, but that's what the community says. I think you've got high educational attainment that shows in the demographics. You will find that there, right? So, I mean, you've got a wide spectrum to look at Trinity Heights.
Mhm. Yeah, excellent,
because of
Candace.
where
Yeah.
it is.
Way
Yeah,
to
they
use observation. That's
yeah,
good.
they moved the parsonage to a really nice area, but the former parsonage was in a very low income area right by the elementary school that is down in that area. So very much lower income and highly Hispanic.
Right.
So that's where the parsonage used to be, but they sold that and got the new one, which is very nice.
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions that came up?
Something I thought might be helpful is, as I'm just thinking about presenting this with my folks at the church, is to begin with what resources are used to draw this information. Just because I'm always curious, so that way you can, Sylvia said it could help us know how to interpret based off of that. Because what you just said about the Mormons not participating is, that was really helpful. And I just thought maybe, and that could, maybe my church wouldn't care where the information came from, but I don't know, for some reason I am always suspect. I think it might be helpful to help interpret. But anyway.
Yes, and if I believe that in the Mission Insight website, when you log in, you can see their sources of data, and primarily it's census information is my understanding. So, okay. So I gave you the handbook to the mosaics that I encourage, and I'll put it again in the chat, and I'll also email it to you. So you'll just have it. You'll have many ways to have it, but this will be helpful to you because when you start to look at your Insight report and you see those mosaics, you'll want to look at what they mean. And so on the bottom of the mosaic page, there's this picture right here that says learn about your mosaic households, and it has all of these really nice links. So the first one is the handbook, which I already gave you, and then how to read it and understanding the portraits, and then how to apply it. So these are a few videos that you can review in your leisure to really understand how to look at that information. We can skip this because I think we already did, well, we already kind of talked about that with the mosaic handbooks. And like Candace said, there's a big university presence in Flagstaff, which makes sense as to why it is colleges and cafes. In this picture, it's because I picked a broader radius when I did this picture. That's why it's different than the report I gave you. And then the next would be the singles and starters, right? And so again, both of these groups here do not typically attend the Trinity Heights United Methodist Church. And so it becomes a question of, is there a way to talk to them? Is there a way to know what their needs are? And how can we as a church and followers of Jesus love them well, even if that means they don't come to our church? Start to ask those questions.
Lauren,
Yes.
it is impossible for any one church to reach every Mosaic segment in their area.
100%.
So I think we need to be careful that this is a tool to see where our heartburst is, not a mandate to do whatever it takes to reach them all.
No, and I wasn't trying to express that. I apologize if that was.
You didn't, but
Okay.
just in case, yeah.
Yes, I think that's a good point. It's just good to know what's around you, right? And to begin to ask the questions. And I like what you said, heartburst. That's a great phrase. Like, where is the heart of our ministry leading us? Where is God calling us to pour into our community? It's not going to be everybody. That's most definitely not. We can't. We don't have the resources for it, nor the energy for it, and maybe not the gifts for it either, right? We have.
That was going to be my
gifts.
point right there, is because Candace said you can't be everything to everybody, because then you will fail at everything.
That's right. And so
And
what
it has to match up with the church's gifts and graces. Just because we want to be this, it doesn't mean we can be that.
right.
You know, being honest and open and saying, you know what, we can't do a contemporary service because that's just not who we are, and we can't do it authentically.
That's a really great point too. And so it helps to know your church community as well as your outer community, right? This Insite report tells you about your outer community. Sorry, I have a photo album here that has a video that just popped up of my daughter's preschool graduation. So that's the sounds you're hearing. And anyway, so knowing your church personality is going to be really beneficial to know how they can be positioned to serving certain communities or where God is calling you to serve, right? Again, this is all just to give us a big picture, to begin the conversation. It's never a mandate. And it's just also not a tool to make people feel guilty or to make them feel like they've failed. What it is a representation of what is reality as much as we can see right now, what the projection is, and then what's our church's response to that, and where is God leading us in that? And that's the big overall picture here. Because there is always more to the story outside of mission insight, we go back to our observational skills, right? We look at some other possibilities to look at our outer community. There's a few ways to do that. There's 5 areas I'm going to tell you about. Some of them are indirect and some of them are direct. So first, let's talk about the non-participant. So these 2 things, the third space listening and the lectio vicinitas, any idea what that one is? I bet you can use your beautiful brains to figure that out. Lectio vicinitas is neighborhood reading. And so we're looking at the neighborhood around us and using it to discern God's call of how our church can relate to the community in a new way. It can be done just by walking through the neighborhood. If you live in a dense population, it could be driving around a rural community, just using your observational skills to see what's there and then offering it up to God to saying, will you give us an idea of how we can love people the best way, how we're most gifted to love people the best way, right? Including God in that conversation is a really important thing here. The other activity is called third space listening. And this is when you sit in an area, let's say you go to a coffee shop nearby and you just sit there for an hour or two and you listen, maybe not eavesdropping to people's conversations, but like listen around you, see who's there. Are there colleagues meeting? Are there friends meeting? Are there children there? Do you hear a lot of stress in their voices? Do you hear a lot of leisure in their voices? What kind of themes are popping up around you?
Right now, can I call you back?
Are there a lot of individuals working on something for hours at a time, right? Are there students? There's so many things we can learn just by going to a local place. And yes, just by going to somewhere local. It tells you a lot about your neighborhood.
Another 20 minutes. Oh, will they let me just come over
And then these are more direct and participant activities. So you could create a focus group if you wanted to, with a small number of locals to meet. Try to diversify your group to see what kind of perspectives they have. Ask how they feel about the community. Do they know the church? Do they know of what the church is up to? Have they interacted with the church at all? Was it positive or negative? There's so many questions you could ask people who don't attend your church, but are living in your community. The goal is to receive just direct feedback and get an idea of how the church is perceived. The other is a relational one-on-one. I have a handout for this too, so you can see all of the steps on how to get this started. Sorry. And this is a one-on-one conversation with a person within the community, and it's meant to uncover and explore, share their stories and their core values. What motivates them? Why are they a part of the community? And why do they care so much about the community? You'd learn a lot. This could be like the chief of the fire department, right? Like you could ask that person, and just somebody who's not affiliated with your church, but affiliated with the community, I think is very eye-opening as well, if you can establish those relationships. And the last is the Ask 5 activity. This is where you have your church leaders drive around town on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning and asking 5 people what church they would recommend. Just see what they say. Just see are they people who go to church? Are they people who don't go to church? Or do they know your church? Do they recommend another church? It just kind of gives you an idea of what they might want. So it could be like a server at a restaurant, a cashier, librarian, that kind of thing. Just anybody random that you could meet. But you do want to ask people that live within a 10-minute drive of a church. Hard, and sometimes our areas, people live further than they are to churches. So, I mean, take that as you will. But the idea being, do they know about the churches nearby? Okay, ask me questions.
Lauren,
Yes, Linda.
I would like to connect that last little segment with our previous discussion, because I have a wondering, and I understand completely about knowing our talents and gifts as a church. But I also wonder how we keep aware of whether or not we are limiting our outreach because we don't want to be out of our comfort zone. And so as leaders, how do we encourage people, inspire people? Well, we've never done that before, or we've always done it this way because this is what we're good at. Pastor Sylvia has taught me very quickly in her short time there that there's a difference between what we think is a nice, good program or activity or outreach, and we're comfortable doing, versus what our data and our observation tell us our community needs. So I'm just wondering how we keep aware of both growing and reaching people, but also being willing to be outside our comfort zone.
That is a great question, Linda. And I think, again, knowing who your church community is, how they are, where their comfort zones are, where they're uncomfortable, right? And then knowing the identity of the surrounding community, and then therefore hopefully can find out what their needs are too, and see where God meets us in the middle, right? I think there's a big part here where God can push us to a new level if we're open to it. But Sylvia and I were just talking about this the other day. It depends on the why. Why, let's, for example, are we saying we want kids in our church? Is it because we really want family and loud and messy and life here in the church? Or do we just want to make sure we don't die? Right? Those are two very different motivations.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so and it's okay if a church is not wanting to reach out towards kids. That's okay. There's other communities that need a church, right? And so it's about knowing who your church is and where God is calling your church to serve in the best of their ability. And so that's maybe where the Lectio Vicinitas really comes at play too, right? Like letting there be some openness there and some guidance of the Spirit as you discern this as leaders within the church.
Thank you. That's great.
Lauren, I was curious if you are aware of any churches that have used this as a tool that has had some success in using this as a tool to reach a targeted demographic based off of the church's give mix and who they were trying to reach out to.
I don't have that off the top of my head. I know they exist, so I'm going to ask Rachel and I'll send that list out as well. I'm sorry, I don't have that on the top of my head. It's a great question. Well, blessings on you today and happy Monday. May you get enough coffee and the day